What if I told you an 1,100-year-old mummy was buried wearing what looks like Adidas boots? Or that a dinosaur fossil still had its skin, armor, and color? These aren't sci-fi plots. They're real archaeological finds that defy logic and time. From ancient roadways lost in bogs to warrior swords polished like gemstones, these discoveries challenge everything we thought we knew about the past. Stick around, because these are the most mind-blowing ancient artifacts ever uncovered. Imagine opening a grave in the icy mountains of Siberia and finding a boot, red leather, black beadwork, pyrite crystals, perfectly preserved after 2,300 years. That's exactly what archaeologists discovered in 1948 in the Altai Mountains. The boot belonged to a Scythian woman, and it's still dazzling today. Why would a people so focused on mobility create something so ornate for the dead? The answer lies in the culture of the Scythians, a nomadic group that roamed the Eurasian steppe from the 9th century BC. They weren't just horse warriors, they were artists, spiritualists, and ceremonial masterminds. The boot wasn't just for walking. In fact, it may never have touched the ground. Preserved by permafrost, it offers a rare glimpse into the lives and afterlives of ancient elites. The boot's design is mesmerizing. Crafted from supple red leather, its sole is intricately inlaid with pyrite and jet black beads arranged in geometric patterns. Some believe it was crafted solely for burial, a masterpiece for the journey to the afterlife. Others argue it belonged to a noblewoman who spent most of her life on horseback, her boots more ornament than utility. But this wasn't an isolated find. The boot came from a burial mound rich with artifacts, weapons, jewelry, preserved food, and textiles. The Scythians believed the dead needed to travel well-equipped into the next world. Bodies were carefully placed in wooden chambers, with horses sacrificed and buried nearby, standing upright, facing east, ready to ride again. This wasn't mere burial, it was a full send-off. Interestingly, the boot's sole may be the most symbolic part. Scythians often sat cross-legged around fires, making the bottom of their footwear highly visible. Decorative soles weren't wasteful, they were statements. Social status, tribal affiliation, even artistic flair could be read in the tread of your shoe. Every bead was a word in a language of prestige. Fashion, for the Scythians, was identity, but it also had protective power. Bright red was a color associated with vitality and protection. The geometric symbols and materials weren't just pretty, they were believed to guard the soul, even beyond death. And while modern fashion struggles to last a few seasons, this boot has lasted over 2 millennia. It's not just an object, it's a survivor, a cultural document in leather and crystal. And it raises deep questions. How did these nomads achieve such craftsmanship? What rituals governed their burials? And what other treasures might still lie, frozen beneath the Altai permafrost? Today, the boot is housed in the State Hermitage Museum, still immaculate, still puzzling. Tourists gawk, historians debate, and in its silence, the boot still speaks of a woman, a culture, and a time when even a boot could carry a soul into eternity. The craftsmanship is all the more astounding when you consider the conditions under which it was made. No industrial tools, no synthetic dyes, no templates. Every stitch was hand-done, every bead intentionally placed. This wasn't fast fashion. This was fashion meant to endure the afterlife. It tells us that to the Scythians, death wasn't an end, but a transition, and one worth dressing up for. Even more revealing is the burial chamber itself. Built underground, its wooden walls were lined with felt and moss, insulation not just for preservation, but for comfort. The Scythians created a second home for the dead, mirroring the world above. Horses weren't buried as sacrifices in a vacuum. They were dressed, groomed, and adorned for the next life. The presence of multiple horses suggests this woman held high status, possibly a priestess or a chieftain's wife. And let's talk about those beads. Black stones were believed to have protective properties, warding off malevolent spirits. In the blinding white of the Arctic, survival depends on seeing clearly. But thousands of years ago, long before goggles, glass, or synthetic lenses, Arctic peoples invented something so effective it rivals modern snow gear: the Inuit snow goggles. Known as Agate or Ngaugek, these ancient goggles were carved from local materials like antler, bone, or driftwood. At first glance, they seem simple. Narrow slits carved across the front to limit light exposure. But their genius lies in that simplicity. The slits cut down the overwhelming glare of sun on snow while also sharpening vision, just like a pinhole camera. That means these weren't just survival tools. They were the world's earliest wearable tech. And despite being over 2,000 years old, they worked so well, their basic design is still mimicked today. But these weren't one-size-fits-all. Each pair was tailored to the face of its wearer. They fit snugly across the brow and cheekbones, tied with sinew cords that held tight through wind and ice. Some were even customized for specific lighting conditions. Larger slits for cloudy days, tighter slits for bright sunlight. This wasn't primitive gear, it was precision engineering. Beyond utility, the goggles were beautiful. They were often etched with decorative carvings or painted with natural pigments. The act of crafting them wasn't just functional, it was artistic. Like everything in Inuit life, form and function were inseparable. A hunter wasn't fully dressed without them, and a well-crafted pair could even be a symbol of skill, identity, or clan affiliation. And here's something truly mind-blowing. These goggles didn't just protect eyes, they may have enhanced sight. Modern researchers have shown that the narrow slits sharpen depth perception and reduce distortion, allowing hunters to track prey across vast, featureless tundra. In a way, they acted like corrective lenses, centuries before anyone had even heard of eyeglasses. Some variations are even more innovative. On St. Lawrence Island, Siberian Yupik people created goggles with slits like Venetian blinds, stacked horizontal lines that diffused light in complex ways. In other regions, people wore visors instead of goggles, adapting to different climates with astonishing creativity. But how did they know? That's the question that lingers. Without microscopes or optometry, how did these early engineers understand light, glare, and focus so intuitively? The answer lies in centuries of observation, passed from generation to generation, woven into stories, rituals, and the very shape of survival. And survival wasn't just about the cold. Snow blindness, caused by UV radiation bouncing off the snow, could incapacitate a person in hours. The pain is excruciating, the damage sometimes permanent. In a land where missing a hunt could mean death, the goggles were a literal lifesaver. Today, museums around the world display these artifacts not as relics, but as revelations. They prove that ancient innovation wasn't limited to pyramids or metalwork. In the Arctic, surrounded by snow, ice, and silence, people crafted brilliance from bone. So the next time you strap on high-tech ski goggles, remember, the design owes everything to indigenous genius. These early Arctic inventors didn't just survive their environment, they mastered it, turning nature into an ally with nothing but their hands, their minds, and their imagination. And the cultural value of these goggles goes even deeper. They weren't just tools, they were personal. Often handed down between generations, a pair of goggles could carry emotional weight, crafted by a parent, worn by a child, remembered through family stories. They were not mass-produced or generic. Each one bore the mark of its maker, a reflection of both environment and experience. In a dusty cave near Manfalut, Egypt, archaeologists uncovered something that looked like it belonged in a fantasy novel, a full suit of Roman armor made from crocodile hide. It wasn't forged from metal, but from the scales of a predator worshipped as a god, and it tells a story of empire, ritual, and cultural fusion unlike anything else from the Roman world. This armor dates to the 3rd century CE and likely belonged to a Roman soldier stationed in Egypt. But this wasn't battlefield gear. It was ceremonial, crafted for religious rituals honoring Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of strength, fertility, and protection. Sobek wasn't just a symbol. He was a divine force believed to control the Nile and ensure the fertility of the land. The armor consists of a cuirass and helmet, made entirely from the durable, interlocking plates of crocodile hide. It's an impressive sight, scaled, textured, and eerily lifelike. And though it may look like it belongs in a role-playing game, it was part of very real ceremonies that blended Roman military structure with Egyptian spiritualism. Wearing this armor wasn't about defense, it was about transformation. The soldier who donned it wasn't just a man. He became a vessel for Sobek's power. During festivals or processions, he may have marched through temples or sacred pools, invoking fear and awe. It was theatre, spectacle, and worship all at once. What makes this even more remarkable is how it reflects cultural hybridity. The Romans were known for absorbing local customs, but the crocodile armor is an extreme example. Here, a Roman military figure participates not just in local religion, but in full costume, literally wearing the skin of a god. This was Roman identity overlaid with Egyptian mysticism, proof that empire doesn't just conquer lands, it merges mythologies. Crocodiles held a special place in Egyptian belief. Temples dedicated to Sobek kept live crocodiles in pools, fed and adorned like royalty. Upon death, they were mummified, wrapped in linen, and buried in sacred tombs. The armor's use of crocodile skin wasn't random, it was sacred material, symbolic and feared. There's also a practical curiosity. Crocodile skin, when treated and dried properly, is surprisingly tough. While not a match for iron on the battlefield, it could deflect slashes and resist wear. African and Nubian warriors also used crocodile and hippo hide for shields and armor, so it wasn't without precedent. But the scale and theatricality of the Roman crocodile armor remains unmatched. It speaks to a military stationed far from home, drawn into local beliefs and made part of sacred rites. And it hints at a deeper truth, that soldiers were not just warriors, but participants in spiritual life. Today, the armor is displayed in the British Museum, where it stops visitors in their tracks. It doesn't just look ancient, it looks magical. A crocodile-man hybrid that seems to have stepped from myth into history. It reminds us that the ancient world wasn't separated into neat categories. Religion, warfare, performance and politics were all intertwined. And in one suit of crocodile armor, stitched together in a grotto near the Nile, we find a symbol of how complex and enchanted the Roman Empire truly was. Even more intriguing is what this armor tells us about identity in the ancient world. Imagine being a Roman legionary, trained under strict discipline and hierarchy, yet living in a land where gods had animal heads and the river itself was divine. You would start to absorb those beliefs, because empire wasn't just about conquest, it was about coexistence. The crocodile armor was a literal manifestation of that blend, turning the soldier into both protector and. In 2011, at a mining site in Alberta, Canada, something extraordinary happened. An excavator operator unearthed what would become one of the best preserved dinosaur fossils in the world. This wasn't just fossilized bone, it was a near-complete, three-dimensional dinosaur mummy, armored, textured, and seemingly frozen in time. The species? Borealopelta mark-mitchelli, a 110 million-year-old plant-eating nodosaur that looks like it walked straight out of prehistory yesterday. Unlike typical fossils, which flatten into rock over time, this one retained its full shape, armor, skin, and even patterns of pigmentation. It's one of the few dinosaur fossils where we can see what the animal truly looked like, down to the ridges of its scales and the armor plates on its back. Paleontologists call it the Mona Lisa of dinosaurs for its astonishing preservation. The discovery was a fluke. The dinosaur had likely died near a river and was swept out to sea, where it sank and was quickly buried in fine sediment. Over millions of years, mineralization turned its skin and armor to stone, preserving the details in 3 dimensions. That lucky accident, plus the quick action of scientists from the Royal Tyrrell Museum, gave the world this once-in-a-lifetime find. Borealopelta was no small creature. It measured about 18 feet long and weighed around 3,000 pounds. But despite its bulk and armor, it was prey. How do we know? Researchers discovered that its skin was darker on top and lighter underneath, a camouflage pattern known as countershading. That's the same technique used by modern deer, sharks, and even penguins to hide from predators. In other words, this tank of a dinosaur needed to stay hidden, and that tells us its world was full of danger. And then there's the armor, real, fossilized armor. Rows of bony plates, known as osteoderms, ran down its back, neck, and tail, forming a biological shield. These weren't just passive protection, they were display pieces too. Some paleontologists believe the armor might have helped Borealopelta attract mates or intimidate rivals, much like a peacock's feathers or a stag's antlers. But the surprises didn't end with skin and armor. Scientists also discovered remnants of organic molecules that revealed its coloring, reddish-brown hues along the top of its body. This breakthrough marked one of the first times scientists could accurately reconstruct a dinosaur's original pigmentation. And incredibly, they even found what appears to be the dinosaur's last meal. Traces of ancient ferns and cycads were preserved in its gut, offering a rare look at its Cretaceous diet. It took over 7,000 hours of meticulous work to extract and prepare the fossil, a labor led by technician Mark Mitchell, whose name now graces the species. His dedication is part of what makes this discovery so legendary. Every inch was cleaned by hand, revealing details that are still being studied more than a decade later. For paleontologists, Borealopelta is more than just a beautiful fossil. It's a time machine. It offers insights into dinosaur biology, ecology, and behavior that no other specimen can match. It shows us how these animals lived, what they ate, how they protected themselves, and even how they looked. The fossil is now housed at the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Alberta, where it's displayed in a climate-controlled gallery, drawing crowds from around the world. Visitors aren't just seeing bones, they're meeting a dinosaur face to face as it might have looked 110 million years ago. And perhaps that's the most incredible part. It reminds us that even in a world ruled by giants, nature sometimes preserves one just perfectly enough for us to meet it again. An armored survivor that traveled through time, buried in rock, and resurrected by human hands. The implications of this discovery go beyond just one species. Borealopelta provides a model for understanding other armored dinosaurs, helping scientists compare defense strategies, body plans, and environmental adaptations across the Nodosaur family. Its incredible state of preservation sets a new gold standard for paleontological research. It also fuels imagination. Artists can now draw armored dinosaurs with unprecedented accuracy. Game developers and filmmakers are turning to Borealopelta as inspiration for how prehistoric creatures might move, look, and behave. It's not just science, it's culture. In the end, Borealopelta Mark Michelli isn't just a fossil, it's a story of survival, death, and the quiet miracle of preservation. Deep within a Mycenaean shaft grave, archaeologists unearthed a weapon so extraordinary, it blurred the line between battlefield and throne room. This was no ordinary blade. It was the Mycenaean Agate sword, a Bronze Age masterpiece forged around 1400 BC, gleaming with semi-precious stones, symbolic power, and the artistry of a civilization that would one day inspire Homer's epics. The sword, believed to have belonged to a high-ranking noble or warrior king, was discovered alongside gold masks, ornate armor, and other lavish burial items. Its blade was cast in bronze but adorned with polished bands of green agate. So luminous, it looked like it was forged from emerald. The craftsmanship is staggering. Each inlay, each curve of the hilt was handcrafted. No two swords were alike. But this wasn't a weapon meant for routine battle. It was a statement, a ceremonial object that projected power, status, and divine right. In the Mycenaean world, warriors didn't just fight, they ruled. And they didn't just carry swords, they wore their legacy in bronze, stone, and gold. The Mycenaeans were a warrior aristocracy. Their leaders ruled from fortified palaces, commanded armies, and held lavish court ceremonies that echoed through the Aegean world. To own a sword like this was to command fear and reverence. Its materials weren't local. Agate had to be imported, possibly from faraway regions like Anatolia or the Levant. This sword told a story not just of war, but of trade, wealth, and cross-cultural exchange. Weapons in Mycenaean graves weren't buried for sentiment, they were strategic. The dead were seen as powerful intermediaries with the gods. Burying a sword like this meant ensuring the deceased could defend their honor in the afterlife and continue influencing the world of the living. And the vertical placement of many Mycenaean swords, stabbed downward into the ground, suggested eternal readiness for battle. This specific agate sword likely belonged to someone who blended both martial and spiritual authority. The craftsmanship aligns with other elite items found in grave circles A and B at Mycenae, burial sites that shocked the archaeological world when Heinrich Schliemann and later Greek teams unearthed their riches. Gold death masks, engraved lion daggers, inlaid armor, the agate sword fits right into this royal toolkit. Interestingly, such ceremonial weapons may have also functioned in real combat under extreme circumstances. While the agate blade was too precious for constant warfare, it was still deadly sharp. It could have been drawn in a moment of high drama, a duel for honor, a display of divine judgment, or a symbolic execution. But beyond its edge and elegance, the sword's beauty carried spiritual weight. Agate, in many ancient cultures, was believed to have protective qualities. It symbolized harmony, courage, and divine favor. Holding such a sword may have felt like wielding a sliver of the gods themselves. Today, the sword resides in museum collections, likely within the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, though some pieces are in private or institutional hands. Its shimmer, even under glass, still radiates the power it once commanded. Visitors aren't just seeing a weapon, they're witnessing how war, art, and spirituality intertwined in the Bronze Age mind. For modern historians, the Mycenaean agate sword is more than a showpiece. It's a touchstone. It confirms that long before classical Greece, there existed a warrior elite who valued beauty as much as brutality, ritual as much as revenge. Their weapons weren't just instruments, they were identities, and that's what makes this sword so enduring. Over 3,000 years later, it still speaks. Not in clangs and clashes, but in gleams of stone and whispers of power. The context in which the sword was found adds another layer to its meaning. Mycenaean shaft graves weren't simple holes in the earth. They were deep vertical pits lined with stone, covered with monumental slabs, and often filled with multiple individuals and their treasured belongings. These were elite tombs, meant to preserve not just bodies, but legacies. Nearby burial goods often included chariots, elaborate drinking vessels, and religious iconography, further blurring the lines between martial and ceremonial life. The sword may have been used in rituals before being buried. Imagine it raised in a libation ceremony or laid beside offerings to invoke protection from the gods of war and the underworld. Hidden beneath the quiet Dutch landscape lies one of Europe's oldest engineered roads. A wooden causeway built through the peat moors of Nieuw-Dordrecht around 2549 BC. At first glance, it might look like little more than decayed timber. But this 4,500-year-old trackway is a feat of Stone Age engineering and ritual imagination. Discovered over a century ago, the road once stretched nearly a kilometre across boggy terrain, carefully constructed from oak trunks and planks laid side by side. Archaeologists believe it was part of a grander path that could have extended over 13 kilometres. But only a portion was ever completed. Why? That's the mystery. Was it abandoned mid-project due to environmental challenges? Or was it never meant to reach a physical destination? Some researchers believe the road wasn't practical infrastructure at all. It was symbolic, a path into the unknown, a ritual journey across a liminal landscape, where earth and water blurred and spirits were believed to dwell. Peat bogs held a special status in Neolithic Europe. They were seen as thresholds, sacred spaces where offerings were made to gods, ancestors, or nature spirits. In bogs across Europe, archaeologists have found sacrificed weapons, jewelry, food, and even human remains. These weren't trash pits, they were altars. The Nieuw-Dordrecht road may have been a ceremonial pathway leading directly into one of these sacred zones. Dendrochronology, tree ring dating, confirms the road's age to an exact year. 2549 BC. That's the same era when farmers in the Netherlands were building megalithic tombs known as hunebeds. Clearly, this was a time of communal effort and spiritual ambition. Constructing a wooden road across unstable peat wasn't easy. Trees had to be felled, cut, transported, and arranged with precision, all without metal tools or wheeled transport. But build it they did. The causeway rises slightly above the surrounding bog, suggesting that it was meant to remain dry even during wetter months. That design required planning, coordination, and deep environmental knowledge. It may even have had ritual rules: who could walk it, when, and why. Some archaeologists propose the road was used during solstice events or funerary processions. Imagine villagers gathered in silence, carrying a body along the wooden path into the mists, accompanied by chants, firelight, and offerings. Or a single figure making a solitary journey to leave behind a precious object, a final act of devotion or supplication. What makes this discovery even more compelling is its preservation. Wood usually decays quickly, but the oxygen-poor conditions of the peat bog acted like a natural freezer, halting rot and sealing the timber in time. Today, portions of the trackway are preserved in museums, offering a rare, tangible link to a time before written language or cities. The Nieuw-Dordrecht road isn't just old, it's profound. It reminds us that even in the Stone Age, humans weren't just trying to survive. They were building, planning, and dreaming. They were shaping the landscape not just for utility, but for meaning. And they were willing to invest enormous labor into projects that spoke to something larger: community, mystery, and the divine. Interestingly, this trackway is not alone in prehistoric Europe. Similar wooden roads have been found in Ireland, England, and Germany, each with its own mystery, but all sharing a common theme: connection. These ancient people weren't just building roads to move goods. They were building paths that connected the human and spiritual worlds. And although we'll never know the names of the builders, their legacy survives. Their road may no longer lead anywhere, but it still leads us into the minds of a people who saw nature as alive with meaning and who dared to carve a path through the unknowable. In the dry desert of ancient Peru, archaeologists uncovered a haunting relic: a human skull over 2,200 years old, still crowned with a cascade of tightly woven braids, measuring an astonishing 2.8 meters in length. This was not just a preserved hairstyle, it was a spiritual artifact, a silent echo of the Nazca culture and its deep reverence for ritual, identity, and the human body. Experts believe the skull belonged to a woman around 50 years old, possibly a priestess or ceremonial leader. Her age, the care in burial, and the elaborate maintenance of her hair all suggest high status. In Nazca belief systems, hair was more than appearance. It was an extension of the self, tied to fertility, memory, and power. To grow and tend to it over decades was both a personal and cultural act of devotion. The Nazca thrived between 200 BC and 600 AD in the arid valleys of southern Peru. They're best known for their geoglyphs, massive desert drawings only visible from above, but their burial practices were equally symbolic. The dry climate acted like a natural mummifier, preserving hair and textiles far better than bones or skin. This woman's braids, still intact, offer an unprecedented glimpse into ancient grooming, gender roles, and spiritual values. Each strand was tightly woven and bundled, suggesting ritual styling, possibly by attendants or family members. Keeping hair that long healthy required constant care, oil treatments, combing, and cultural reinforcement that long hair held sacred meaning. In many Andean traditions, hair connected the living to the earth and the ancestors. It symbolized life force, continuity, and the flow of time. To bury someone with their braids intact was to preserve their spiritual essence. It's possible the braids were styled for the funeral specifically, prepared as a sacred wrapping, a ceremonial garment made from the body itself. What's more, the sheer length of her hair tells a story of patience and protection. Human hair grows about a centimetre per month. To reach nearly 3 meters could take a lifetime, assuming few cuts. That implies a life uninterrupted by trauma, illness, or forced labor, conditions that would disrupt hair growth. In other words, this was a woman of privilege and purpose. The skull was likely discovered in a necropolis, an ancient burial ground where the Nazca interred their dead in seated positions, wrapped in layers of cloth and surrounded by grave offerings, food, tools, ceramics, and possibly textiles woven with cosmological patterns. Her braids, coiled and arranged, may have served as both ornament and offering. Hair's survival is no accident. In the Nazca Desert, where rain is almost non-existent and sunlight is intense, the climate created one of the most ideal preservation environments on Earth. Combined with intentional burial practices, this allowed fragile organic material, especially hair, to endure for centuries. The skull is now studied not just by archaeologists, but by anthropologists, biologists, and cultural historians. It's a rare biological archive. Researchers analyze hair to understand diet, migration, and even stress levels in ancient individuals. But this skull offers more than data. It offers a presence, a face framed by hair that once blew in desert winds, that once witnessed rituals, births, and perhaps the creation of the Nazca lines themselves. It forces us to ask, what did she see? What role did she play in her community? And what was she trying to tell us through the hair she carried for decades? Her story, whispered through every braid, reminds us that ancient cultures didn't separate the sacred from the physical. In their eyes, the body was a canvas of belief, and in the stillness of the tomb, her hair remains, long, deliberate, and defiant of time. High in the Altai Mountains of Mongolia, at nearly 2,800 meters above sea level, archaeologists made a stunning discovery. A woman's mummy buried over 1,100 years ago, dressed in traditional garments and knee-high felt boots, strikingly similar in design to modern Adidas. Her perfectly preserved outfit, found in 2016, became a viral sensation. But beyond the meme lies a deeper story of craftsmanship, ritual, and cultural complexity in the ancient Turkic world. The woman was believed to be between 30 and 40 years old. Judging by the items found in her grave, an embroidered bag filled with sewing tools, a beauty kit with a comb and mirror, a knife, vases, and the skull of a ram, she may have been a seamstress. Yet, her burial was far from ordinary. The grave was meticulously prepared, packed with over 50 personal items, and even included the remains of a sacrificed mare, an animal essential to steppe life and deeply tied to the afterlife in Turkic culture. And then there were the boots, made of felt and leather, with bold red and black stitched stripes. The boots bear an uncanny resemblance to Adidas footwear. While obviously not modern, their design showcases an advanced level of textile skill and a flair for aesthetic composition. It's no wonder people across the world were captivated. But for archaeologists, the boots were less about fashion trends and more about cultural expression. Their craftsmanship suggests this woman belonged to a community with rich textile traditions and symbolic dress codes. Preserved in the permafrost and treated with shilajit, a tar-like resin still used today in traditional medicine, the mummy and her belongings survived in incredible condition. Her clothing, especially the boots, reflects the blend of practicality and ornament typical of Turkic dress, sturdy enough for harsh climates, but designed with identity in mind. The inclusion of 4 changes of clothing hints at an afterlife belief where the dead continue to travel and require garments. Her beauty items suggest the importance of appearance even in death, and the sacrificed horse speaks volumes. In steppe cultures, horses weren't just transportation, they were spiritual companions. Burying a mare alongside her implies status, belief in the afterlife, and a desire for continuity between the physical and spiritual worlds. The cause of her death was likely a severe head injury. CT scans revealed skull fractures consistent with a traumatic blow. Whether this was due to violence, accident, or ritual sacrifice is unknown, but the respectful burial argues against disgrace. Culturally, the find is groundbreaking. It's the first fully preserved Turkic burial of its kind in Central Asia, offering a rare snapshot of daily life, spiritual beliefs, and material culture. The garments reflect a synthesis of regional styles and suggest a well-developed sense of personal and communal identity among the Turkic peoples during the 9th to 10th centuries. What elevates this mummy's story from archaeological curiosity to cultural bridge is how the Adidas boots remind us of a timeless truth. Good design lasts. Fashion, at its core, is about more than trends. It's about making something to endure, to protect, and to express. Today, the mummy is housed in the National Museum of Mongolia. She's studied not just for her clothes, but for what those clothes tell us about women's roles, artisanal knowledge, and spiritual values in early medieval Central Asia. In a world where modern shoes fall apart in a year, these 1,100-year-old boots stand tall, stitched with purpose, preserved by climate and care, and immortalized in memes and museum displays alike. A legacy in leather, red thread, and snowbound silence. In the frozen heart of Siberia, buried beneath a peat bog for more than 11,000 years, archaeologists discovered a wooden statue unlike anything else on Earth, the Shigir Idol. Carved from a single larch tree, originally standing over 5 meters tall, it is the oldest wooden sculpture ever found, and one of the most mysterious. Covered in strange faces and geometric symbols, the idol is a masterpiece of prehistoric art and an enigma that continues to puzzle scientists and historians alike. The Shigir Idol was first unearthed in 1890 by gold miners in the Ural Mountains near modern-day Kirovgrad, Russia. Preserved by the oxygen-free, antiseptic environment of the bog, the wood survived in astonishing condition. At the time, fragments of the statue were recovered and pieced together to reveal a towering figure carved on all sides with zigzags, chevrons, and human-like faces. Some faces are solemn, others strange, stacked vertically like a spiritual totem. These designs weren't random. They were a language, a code, a book in wood, thousands of years before writing. Radiocarbon dating has confirmed the idol's origin around 9,500 BC, twice as old as the pyramids, and predating Stonehenge by 6,000 years. This makes it not only the world's oldest wooden artifact, but one of the oldest examples of symbolic art on Earth. And yet, its message remains unread. The tree used for the idol was already over 150 years old when it was felled. And the tools, beaver jawbones. These early artists didn't use metal. They used sharpened teeth and ingenuity to carve deep grooves and fine lines into the timber. Their skill is undeniable. The level of detail is astonishing. The topmost face stares with both eyes forward, as if watching time itself pass. Below it, a series of angular carvings appear to mark boundaries, rivers, or spiritual realms. What does it mean? Theories abound. Some scholars believe the idol depicts a creation myth. Others think it maps a spiritual journey or contains laws of a long-lost society. Ethnographers have proposed symbolic meanings for the patterns: zigzags as water, arrows as protection, rhombuses as fertility. If these ideas are correct, then the Shigir Idol is the oldest encoded message from humankind, carved knowledge passed across generations in silence. Despite losing some pieces over the years, the surviving portion, about 2.8 meters, is preserved in a glass sarcophagus at the Yekaterinburg History Museum. There, researchers from around the world come to study not only its carvings, but what they represent: the ability of humans to imagine, to symbolize, and to remember. It's especially surprising that such a complex artwork came from hunter-gatherers. The creators of the idol didn't live in cities or farm crops. They lived in forests, moving with the seasons, yet they still carved a monument that endures longer than most stone. This challenges assumptions about the so-called primitive past. The Shigir Idol shows that spiritual and artistic complexity existed long before agriculture, cities, or writing. It speaks of a culture that saw the world not just in terms of survival, but in sacred shapes and signs. They were already asking the big questions: who are we? Where do we go when we die? How do we make sense of the world? We may never fully decode the idol, but its presence is a powerful reminder. Before temples or alphabets, we carved our questions into wood. We shaped our awe into symbols. And we left messages for the future, not in words, but in patterns, faces, and the grain of a tree that once touched the sky, ingenuity and intention. From a Scythian boot stitched for eternity to a dinosaur preserved mid-stride, from crocodile-clad cultists to a wooden god staring through time. Each artifact is a story, not just of survival, but of imagination. These ancient relics speak to a shared desire to be remembered, to create beauty, to bind the living and the dead through craft and meaning. The Nazca braids, the Mycenaean sword, the Adidas-style boots, they're not just archaeological finds. They are echoes of human creativity, resilience, and belief in something beyond the material world. We often think of the past as crude and the modern as refined, but these artifacts reveal the opposite, that sophistication, symbolism, and spiritual depth have always been with us. So next time you look at a pair of shoes, a carving, or a road, ask yourself, what story is it telling? What will remain of us? And if you found this journey through ancient ingenuity as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more history brought to life, and share your favorite artifact in the comments below, because history isn't buried, it's waiting to be uncovered, one artifact at a time.